Well, thank you to everyone who has joined us so far. We want to welcome you to the 5 Metrics That Matter, Quantifying Success for Product and CS Teams webinar, brought to you today by Pendo and ClientSuccess. I'm Brent Peterson, a customer success strategist here at ClientSuccess. Pendo enables product teams to understand what truly drives product success with powerful analytics, in-app user feedback, and contextual guidance designed to help companies measure and elevate the customer experience. Pendo is on a mission to improve society's experiences with software. And ClientSuccess is a customer success management platform that helps leaders and CSMs retain and grow their customer base through communication and collaboration across the customer journey. During today's webinar, we're going to discuss how customer success and product organizations have a rich overlap of key metrics that they use to measure success. And we will discuss 5 top metrics, and we'll share ideas about how both teams can become more effective and collaborative once they understand which metrics are unique and which are shared. It's my pleasure to welcome Dan Demas, Vice President of Customer Success at Pendo. Dan, welcome.
Thanks, Brent. Appreciate it. Very happy to be here.
Glad to have you. And Dave Blake, Founder and CEO of ClientSuccess. Dave, welcome as well.
Thanks, Brent. Pleasure to be here and to collaborate on this webinar with Dan and the team at Pendo.
Great. We're glad to have you both. For our attendees and those listening, we will be recording the webinar today, and we will go ahead and send that to your inbox later this week. We're going to start talking here today about product and CS teams and how they share metrics. You know, success is oftentimes seen as being on the hook for customer satisfaction, but the reality is that about 90% of the satisfaction is driven by the product. And if no collaboration exists, then customer success might struggle. Therefore, it's key that the teams align with each other. And the first metric we're going to talk about here today is product breadth. So Dan, I'll ask you to kick it off and begin talking about product breadth. Will you help us understand what is meant by this metric and why this metric is important?
Sure. So product breadth to us is actually part of a 3-part metric that we look at called BDF. And Brent, as we know, we'll talk about the D and the F here shortly. But breadth is essentially to us the number of users that are interacting with our software at a particular company. So we like to look at this as active licenses sometimes, active visitors, but essentially for us, it's a great indicator of how sticky we become within an organization. And additionally, from an importance standpoint, it really gives us the ability to absorb turnover within our customer base at an organization and ensure that we're not incurring a huge churn risk. So if you look at maybe a customer of ours or somebody where maybe there's only 1 or 2 users, if you lose a single user at that company, which inevitably happens, if you only have 2 users, you're looking at 50% turnover of your user base within that company. It's a huge hit, where if we're able to get 10, 20, 30 users within an organization, losing 1, even if they're a key stakeholder for us, makes it much easier for us to recover and gives us the time we need to rebuild that relationship. So, great. Dave, from your standpoint, how have you seen this used historically?
Yeah, the way I look at product breadth, when we talk about usage, there's 2 phrases that are often used: usage and adoption. And I think a product breadth is that adoption piece. It's really understanding how we're going wide in an organization and how we're driving value outside of even the core group that we initially sold into. And so it's a key metric. I think a couple things to consider with product breadth is that you can look at it in a couple different ways. One, Dan, you touched a little bit on this, was percentage of users, licensed users, percentage of active users to percentage of licensed users. So if a customer of yours has purchased 100 licenses, but only 50 of those are active, then you have a risk there. And on the other hand, if your user base is butting up right against that 100, there's a real opportunity to go and look at expansion opportunity in the future. So it's a great indicator of both risk and opportunity within an account.
So Dave, I think from our standpoint, when I look at how it's used here internally at Pendo, I think both from a product and a customer success standpoint, we're always looking for opportunities, like you mentioned, to expand. And we essentially run playbooks on that. Sometimes it's by role. So we're interested in a number of different titles and functions that we service. And so sometimes we may have 5 or 6 users, and we take a look at that, and it's all maybe product-focused individuals, but we're looking to strengthen our relationship. And so we may then do an expand playbook into customer success. I think for us, both from a product and a CS standpoint, it's really a good indicator of the value that we're showing to an organization.
Yeah, I like that. Looking at it, segmenting by role. Another way to look at it is, is the product breadth or the adoption happening at the front line, or is it happening at the executive level? And to focus on both from a functional standpoint, but also from a roles and responsibility standpoint, as far as tiered from frontline to management to executive team. And really having the playbooks and the focus and the measurement to see how you're driving the adoption across those different factors.
Sure, and utilizing breadth as a key metric. I mean, what is maybe one mistake or something that you see people do that you think is a best practice they should be leaning the other direction or should be implementing that maybe not be obvious?
I think the focus on from a product strategy, understanding that sometimes your feature sets are targeting different functional groups, and that's okay. But thinking from a holistic company standpoint, do we have a clear strategy that drives adoption beyond that, from a product perspective, and then from a customer success perspective? Do we have the resources? Do we have the right CSMs focused on the strategies to go high and wide in an organization? It's a term we often use. That means that we're not focused on one group or one individual, but that we're looking at the training and enablement and achieving objectives for a broad set of customers to drive that adoption up. Adoption typically doesn't come by itself a lot of times, and so having a product strategy and a customer success strategy to drive this product breadth is really important.
Sure, and one, I have some strong feelings on this in one particular area, and I think it's more of a philosophical debate. So I'll state my case. I'd be curious to see what you think as well. But we obviously service customers throughout our career and at our different companies, from SMB to mid-market to enterprise or above. And some of the times I have a CSM come to me historically or a product manager and say, well, look, this particular company, this particular customer of ours, they're only going to have 1 or 2 users. So is there a way that I can mark this as healthy once those folks are in there and I have those 2 users? Can I consider that to be healthy? My stance on that is generally that no, we don't have, we're not sticky within that company, regardless of how many we expect. We just have to know that that is a customer that is always going to be at risk. But I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that.
I think there's always potential beyond the initial user group that you sold to. So if you sell into it and you say, we think this customer is just a small customer and we think there's only to be 1 or 2 users, my question would be, well, one, are we knocking it out of the park with those 2 users? Are they getting the initial value that they expected? And then 2, who beyond those 2 users can we drive additional value for? And I would say that from a product and a customer success strategy, we would try to go beyond them and drive the usage up. I think usage you want to have the directional going positive and expanding broader and broader over time.
All right. Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think I had a little bit more of a glass half full where we're stuck at the 2, but yeah, I agree. We should always be looking for opportunities to grow into 3 and 4.
Yep.
Now, Dan and Dave, we have a question from one of our attendees about product breadth that I thought I would bring up. And they'd like to know, what specific actions does a CSM need to take to drive product breadth?
Well, I'll jump in there. From a CSM perspective, to drive product breadth is to, I think there's a couple things. One is to understand the business objectives across the organization. Business objectives are defined by customers. We can't assume what they are. But if we understand the business objectives at different levels, it's easy for us to align, to help ensure our product and our company align to those business objectives. And then I think a lot of times CSMs make the mistake of training a power user and assuming that the water is getting to the end of the row, if you know that phrase. Assuming that that training and enablement is getting to the end users, all the end users, and forgetting that there are a lot of times a lot of changeovers. There's new employees, there's additional employees that come into the team. And so having a strategy of training and enablement aligned to business objectives, either personal or instructor-led training enablement or content training enablement is really important to drive that product breadth and depth, and to realize that it's an ongoing process. You don't have breadth from day one. You don't have one training session and it's over. You need to think about how you continue to reinforce and enhance that enablement over time.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Our second metric is product depth. And Dave, maybe I'll ask you to kick this one off here. Help us understand product depth and why it's important.
Yeah, product depth is really talks about leveraging your product to the fullest. And so many times you see customers who are using your product on a very surface level basis. They are doing the very basics, and they really haven't been able to dig deeper into the product and leverage the broader core functionality and feature set. And so product depth is looking at how sophisticated are your customers using the product. Are they using it to its fullest? Are they using a very narrow slice of your product? And how can we make sure that they're leveraging it to the fullest and having both product strategy and customer success strategy to deepen the use of your individual product. Dan, what are your thoughts, and how do you guys look at product depth from Pendo's perspective?
Yeah, so if I actually bring some of the product piece into it, I mean, obviously from a success standpoint, we're looking for balanced usage. I mean, we track visits to key areas of our applications. We kind of group it into modules, and so we look, especially going into QBRs, especially going into renewal conversations, we're looking to see, are we deficient in a particular area of the application, and either use it as an opportunity to educate them, to send them. For example, like a one-to-many campaign to drive adoption and usage in that area. But from a product perspective, obviously working with our product managers, what they're looking at here is, first, I think there's a CS responsibility to educate and train. But from a product perspective, our product managers are spending a lot of time developing new features, honing new areas of the application, and our product managers are looking first at, how easy is it for somebody to get there? So are we doing the right notifications in the application? Are we promoting it the right way? And then once somebody actually gets there, are they coming back and are they continuing to use that? So I think to represent product in this one, they're looking for sustained usage of different areas of the application because they're obviously looking to solve a need for their customers and for our customers, and are people coming back over and over again, because that ultimately is a sign of their ease of use, the value of what they've built. And do we need to go back and actually interview users that are bouncing from that particular feature to find out, what did we do wrong? Maybe what mark didn't we hit that we now need to address in order to provide you value? That's great.
I would add a little bit to that. I think as you look at tracking product depth, I think there's some principles apply here that we talked about just briefly, in that it's really important to do some analysis at the functional role and the functional area basis as well. So there are maybe deeper features of a product that an executive might use versus a frontline, or a functional group versus another functional group. One thing that we noticed at one time when I was at Omniture was that there are aspects of your product that provide tangible value to your customers that may not be as easily measured as other areas of your product. So for example, we looked at the product depth and product usage across executives, and Omniture was a web analytics suite, an analytics suite similar to Google Analytics or others. And we saw that in this particular customer that the executive depth was very low, and we were concerned about that. But as we dug in a little bit further, what we really saw was that the executives were consuming the information via email-based reports and dashboards. And so while we saw that they weren't necessarily logging in as much into the platform, they were relying very heavily on the data and were receiving a tremendous amount of value. They just consumed the information a different way, and that was through emailed reports and dashboards. So those are a couple things to make sure as you look at and you analyze and you strategize around product depth, to make sure that you consider those fringe cases and the different channels in which you provide value for your customers.
So can I ask how you uncovered that particular use case? Because it sounds like it's a little tricky to figure that one out. And I think getting to the underlying cause of some of these things and being able to troubleshoot usage is extremely important. So I'd be curious to know how you guys went about that.
Yeah, that was really about knowing the customer and starting with one customer and just peeling back the onion to understand how they're using the product. A lot of times we focus a lot of our product usage analyses around churn and reason for churns or the negative aspects of product usage. But in many cases, it's really important to also go and do deep analysis of what they do like about your product and where they're getting value, and doubling down on those areas. That might have a bigger impact on your numbers versus focusing on the negative. And in this case, we did just that. We had a hypothesis that it seemed off that these executives weren't consuming the reports and analytics. And it was a series of interviews that we were able to have that uncovered the fact that they actually were. It's just that we weren't able to measure it because they were being consumed through email dashboards. And so it was a real enlightening process that we went through, and that discovered the value prop in a different way than we originally thought.
Yeah, it's great to know. That's good information. I think if I think about the inherent risks that are involved in this type of a situation, I think that for me, what I've seen in the past, and I'd be curious about your perspective as well, is the inherent risk that I see when customers are not using the entire depth of your product is one, we see competitors that offer maybe just a single feature, a very narrow use case that can offer that at a lower cost, and I see that as being a risk for us in CS and product. Additionally, maybe not being able to renew at the same price. A customer may come back to you and say, "Hey, Dave, you charged me X for this. I bought into the vision. I'm only using this one particular area, and so I can't pay you as much, but I am willing to pay you a third of it if you're willing to give it to me just for this particular item." And I see that those are two of the bigger risks I see when it comes to this particular lack of depth situation.
Yeah, I agree. I know there's a question on here from a participant who's asking about whether it's always important for the entire product to be used, and asked about whether there's some features that would normally go unused. And I guess my answer to that is that I think that's the responsibility of the product team and the customer success team to really look at the product. If there is a portion of the product or a small portion of the product that's never used, and despite your efforts to demonstrate the value prop of that feature set, then there's a tough question that's always hard to ask, is whether or not you should even have that feature in the product, whether or not you should peel it out and to strengthen other areas or double down in other areas of the product. So hopefully we're all building products and feature sets that provide value across the board, and that we can drive this product depth. But if we find some component that's not, then sometimes there is a tough question to say, should we remove or sunset a portion of the feature,
Sure.
of the feature set?
And when I think we also got another question about, whose role does it fall under to uncover this? And I think you highlighted that we both have responsibilities, both as a product and a customer success team. But I think to the previous statement I made before, at least in my opinion, there's different functions that we both play. It falls under both. Yeah. One, there's a aspect of, is our customer aware? And I think that falls into new feature notification, right, which is a product marketing as well as a bit of a marketing function. There's customer success. We're responsible for ensuring that we do training. We roll out programs for customers to be able to learn and use the functionality. But then at that point, if we're not seeing the stickiness, people aren't coming back, product needs to dive in. And I think your example before was great. At a per user level, get down to the actual users and start to uncover what's wrong with what we designed. And then make the decision, does it stay or does it go?
Yeah, I agreed. And, just going back to the original slide that Brent said, the importance of the collaboration between the two teams, the way we look at it is that product and customer success are sister organizations similar to sales and marketing. They both have distinct roles and responsibilities, but they are closely aligned, and especially in a SaaS environment, they have to be closely aligned and collaborative and sometimes sitting in the same location to foster that communication and collaboration.
Yeah, I think my product team enjoys sitting the row behind us. So.
Exactly. All right.
Very good. Now, our third metric that we will talk about is product frequency. And Dan, help us understand product frequency.
Sure. So from a frequency standpoint, I think this can take a number of different shapes, but I'll talk about how we look at it here. And so we essentially take a look at first is our user coming in daily, weekly, or monthly. And so we have a days active over the last 30 days that we use to figure that out. So if it's under 3 days, they're generally a monthly user. If they're under 14 days, they're a weekly user. And if they're 21 days, then we're looking at a monthly user. So we want to know, are they coming in multiple times a week? Are they coming in multiple times a day? This shows kind of that addiction factor. So, can this particular customer live without us? Is it, if their boss came to them and said, hey, look, we're looking to downsize our budgets, is this particular software one you can do without? And I want them to go to their boss and say, hey, look, I'm in there 21 days a month. There's no way you can take this away from me. I cannot function without doing it. The alternative being I come in there once a month, I'm kind of viewed as a snacker, right? So I go in every once in a while, I look at a few things, and then I get out. You're pretty easily replaceable at that point. One other component that we utilize for this is time on site. So we not only look at how frequently and how many unique days are you coming in on a monthly basis, but are you actually spending a substantial amount of time in the product that leads me to believe that you're actually seeing value, you're going around in the product, you're exploring all the different areas. And we use this as a weighting factor on top of frequency. So
that's great.
Yeah, Dave, I was curious.
A couple things around product frequency that I think that are kind of interesting paradigms to think about. From a product frequency perspective, there are some software use cases where the frequency may be less than daily, where it may make sense to be less than daily. And those I think are more rare. But a lot of software solutions, they're expecting their core user base that they're selling to be in there on a daily basis. And as Dan, as you mentioned, all day, a good portion of the day. Our product is one of those where customer success managers are in it every day, all day is their primary platform. One of the key things to watch with product frequency is that sometimes looking at product usage can be a false positive indicator. And I'll give you one example. Is that we had somebody who was using a marketing automation solution for their marketing department. It was the plumbing of the department. And even though they weren't happy with that marketing automation solution, they had to keep it on until they found and implemented their next solution. And so, unfortunately, for the marketing automation solution, watching that every day, they saw the usage consistent every single day until the usage completely cliffed. when their customer switched over to another marketing automation solution. And so there is the importance of making sure that you don't rely entirely on product usage to the fact that you're not looking at other health indicators, just in case there's that one unique scenario where they're using you and you can't but you can't see that they're actually an unhappy customer.
So Dave, in my experience, I've essentially seen the low using customers are ones that I see dropping out of the market. And by dropping out of the market, they oftentimes don't replace you. And those ones I find are fairly easy to forecast. They're foreseeable due to the fact that they don't have the frequency, they don't have the breadth, they don't have the depth. And then the situation that you're seeing, I think, is very real and a little bit more surprising because they are high users. They're looking for specific needs. They tend to be competitive losses, and they also tend to be your higher paying customers, right? So, in your experience, how have you remedied that situation, or how have you seen a successful playbook against that, either from a product standpoint or from a success standpoint?
Well, in this case, I think it really does fall more on the shoulders of the customer success team, where the customer success team needs to have a really good pulse on the relationship and be checking in regularly, and looking for other signs outside of standard metrics, data-driven metrics of risk. And so, in the example I gave, if that company had just checked in, several times over the year to understand, are we hitting the key business objectives? Are we meeting your needs? Are we aligned to your goals? They would have heard firsthand from that customer, no, you're not. But in the one example, they really didn't check in as much as they should have, and learned a hard lesson that a purely data-driven approach to customer health can be dangerous in some circumstances.
Sure. And I think losing customers is just a reality. I mean, it does happen. And so I'm curious to know, have you seen any of your customers, or have you done this at any of the companies you've had, where you do go back and you ask the customer to do a bit of a retro for you and say, hey, where did we miss the mark? I find that these customers oftentimes don't have a poor relationship with you. They say, hey, look, Dave, I'm really sorry, but it just wasn't meeting our needs. I didn't feel comfortable telling you, so I had to kind of surprise this on you and send you the text to break up, right? So, how do we find out what went wrong in those situations?
Yeah, I think there's certainly indicators ahead of time, and I always say embrace your most vocal customers, because they're the ones who care enough to tell you what's going wrong, and be very aware of the silent customers, because they're the ones that are apathetic and have given up essentially. But after the fact, if we're already done, somebody has churned, then we usually recommend that you do this post churn analysis. And maybe even have somebody other than the CSM or somebody in the customer success organization conduct that analysis so that it's very objective, and make sure that you're sharing those learnings across the organization, and talk about all aspects of it, from product usage and these metrics we talked to today, to relationship and other areas of the business.
Now, we have a question here, Dan and Dave. What do you think are the best metrics to pair with frequency to really understand product health, specific metrics?
So I could start off that one. When we started the discussion on metric 1, metric 2, and now metric 3 being frequency, so breadth, depth, and frequency, we subscribe to a BDF score here at Pendo, and it is one aspect of our health scoring, but it is one that we kind of use as our behavioral scoring aspect of the overall health score. Because like Dave said, it's not always indicative of the actual customer health. It is a behavioral indicator of how deep you are, how frequently they're coming in, the value that they're seeing. So we essentially use B, D, and F. We weight those a little bit separately. I actually weight the frequency a little bit higher. But essentially those combine together to give us a score of 0 to 20. We space it out every 5 points to have a red, at risk, healthy, and champion status in that particular category. So Dave, do you do anything similar, or do you pair frequency?
Yeah, I think from a product frequency, we're looking at we're looking at how many daily active users to monthly active users or weekly active users to see how often they're logging in, but also how many unique logins they have. But then again, I think that it's really important to pair product data with other type of data. I think at the end of the day, health comes down to two different forms of engagement. One is product engagement, which we're talking about today, and the second is customer engagement. Is how often are they engaging with you, how rich are those engagements, and how you're driving value directly with them. So those are some things that we always look at.
Excellent. Thank you both. Our fourth metric is NPS, and I imagine there'll be some strong thoughts about NPS. Dave, can you kick us off there?
Yeah, I think NPS is a great indicator. Again, that should be held in context. It's one indicator of customer health, but it's a very popular one that most SaaS companies have embraced and are doing. In this case, there's a very specific focus on NPS of your product, and we like to look at it as focusing on sending the NPS survey to product users and asking it very specifically from a product perspective, and how likely would you recommend our product to somebody you know. It's really important that you track this, that you understand that NPS is more about direction than the absolute number. It's which way you're trending over time, because there are changing an NPS score. You typically don't do it overnight. It's usually a cross-functional effort, and so you leverage the data that you're getting as you go to directionally change it in a positive direction to try to attract more promoters. So those are one interesting thing. I know Pendo's done some really innovative stuff around linking NPS with product usage and adoption, breadth and depth. And so, Dan, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, NPS is something that is an ongoing conversation here at Pendo that we love to talk about. So I think one of the biggest changes for me in customer success and coming to Pendo is that here our chief product officer owns the deployment, the reporting, and everything that has to do with NPS, which was a bit of a change for me. Historically, I'm used to the one doing the analysis, coming up with recommendations, and it's been really nice here having our chief product officer own that. One of the biggest changes that occurred there is that we've really been able to move the needle because we both feel the investment. I think NPS is ingrained in customer success. We've typically really taken that very personally, but to see a product team that is so invested in ensuring that we have a positive NPS score has been a huge change, and one of the biggest things for us to achieving a great NPS score here. Now, one of the things that we have done that I've never seen before that I really thought was unique was we first look at our NPS score by area of the product. So we collect an NPS score just as anybody else would. When you log into the application, you're presented with, how likely are you to recommend? But then we go and do our own analysis natively within our product to show you, well, of your detractors, where are they spending time in the application? So we're not asking it on a page in that particular area of the application. We're letting them go on with their day, and we're now telling you that's where they spend their time. So it's been very useful for us to not lead the witness in a way by asking them in a particular area of the app, but being able to go back and see, oh, well, these 4 pages tend to be used by people that are dissatisfied with our product, and they all happen to be in one area of the application. Let's go talk to those folks, and let's level up our game there. Additionally, we're also looking at product usage by time on site. So again, once we get that score, we get to see on a chart where on one axis we're seeing how much time are they spending, on the other it's their NPS score. So we're able to identify both from a product and a CS standpoint, do we have a detractor that's a very high user? That's a huge risk for us, but also a huge opportunity. So most oftentimes our product managers will identify those individuals, reach out to them, set up phone calls, and figure out, you should be a promoter. you rely on us to do your job. What do we need to do to fix your experience? Because you're one of the people that we really want to be a customer of ours.
That's great. I know there's a question that asked whether we recommend segmenting MPS by product users or decision makers, and I'd say yes, to the extent you can. Definitely look at the MPS data through different lenses. So you may be getting a positive MPS from frontline users, but may not be meeting the needs at all for the executive stakeholders in your organization. And so anytime you can segment your data by customer segment or different user segments, that's very helpful. And then the last thing I'll just say from an MPS standpoint is a general theme here is that MPS is a company metric. It's not a product metric. It's not a customer success metric. Usually the things to improve that are required to improve an MPS require collaboration across the organization. And so sharing that information across the entire company is really important. And then having cross-functional plans to address and the constructive feedback is really important as well.
Excellent, thank you. Well, our fourth metric here is time to value. And, this might prove to be a bit of a sleeper here, but we may have just left one of the most important metrics for last. Dan, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, time to value has been something that I've actually been refining and looking at over the last 4 or 5 years. And it is, I think, in a lot of ways, very difficult to measure, first, because there can be technological challenges with it. Secondly, I think this is impacted by a number of departments, not even just outside of customer success and product, but this can lead all the way up into the marketing message, to the sales value proposition, to the handoff. So this is one where I think one of the best practices that I like to recommend to people is changing, one variable at a time and making sure that you're controlling the environment. If you go in and you try to revamp too much at once, it can get a little sticky. So the time to value, by the way, that I'm talking about, I'll give the overview, is looking at key value drivers within your product. So you'd mentioned marketing automation. It's something I know very well, and it's an easy example of when does your customer send their first email? That's a value moment. So measuring from the time they either sign up or they log in to the first time that they send that first email, that's the time to value. And I recommend doing maybe 3 to 5 of these. But, Dave, from your standpoint, what do you think is digestible? What are some best practices you've seen?
Yeah, I agree. I think we're aligned here. I think it's really important for the callers on this webinar to think about what are the time to value indicators for your specific product. Every product will have a different value prop and value indicators, and there should be a data-driven as well as subjective aspects of it as well. One is, are they achieving outcomes, and what are those outcomes in your product, and are you measuring that for whatever it makes sense for your business? And then second, have you also had your CSM capture the key business objectives, and how quickly can you achieve one of those objectives? So we look at it both, product-based measurement of activity in your product, but also some of the more subjective indicators around objectives that you're capturing in the sales process and in the kickoff call.
So in your organization, who tracks this? Who reports on it back to you?
The process starts, I'd say the time to value, the value definition, we call key business objectives. And we're trying to capture those in the sales process. And those are handed off in a smooth handoff to the customer success managers once the deal is closed. They validate those and they're trying to achieve those. So that one is more of a customer success base. But then the other product related value indicators can be measured using various tools. And again, it's very unique to every company and every product what those might be. For Salesforce, it may be opportunities closed. For a billing company, it may be invoices generated. Every company has a slightly different value indicator, and it's just important to outline those and measure those and see if you can achieve those as quickly as possible.
Great. Well, if we have several questions here that I'd like to get to, and before we do that, Dan and Dave, I'd ask you each maybe to just make a short comment about how do we take these metrics and make them actionable? How do we act on what we've talked about today?
Sure, I can start with that. So I think there's, if I was to lay out maybe 3 to 4 steps to success in this area, is the first step would be to track these. I think that generally is the hardest thing for a lot of folks, but setting out a reasonable amount of time, defining who's going to do it, and setting some reasonable goals. So like time to value, don't choose 10 things, choose 3, right? So first is tracking the data. Next would be defining roles and responsibilities. So, common question throughout, this product and CS webinar, who's responsible for these? I think everybody should be if you're going to be successful, but then what role do we each play in each metric, right? Next is carving out some resources. In my opinion, this is one of those things that's easy to put off till later. And, 12 months goes by and you realize, oh, we actually didn't do anything. So dedicating resources to it, or at least carving out a percentage of time from particular individuals to say, like, this is a first-class citizen for us, and we're going to invest time in onboarding, or we're going to invest time in improving this area of the application every month that isn't seeing the traction that we're looking for is critical. And then, Dave, you brought up a very important thing that I think very much applies to NPS, I think is where you mentioned it, but across the board, this is a whole company effort. One team alone can't go out and accomplish these things. Product team can make the best product on the planet, but if there's nobody there to help the users get over a hump or to answer some technical questions, it's not going to work. If you're a CS team and you're trying to educate a user that can't literally use the product because there's something fundamentally wrong, there's a bug, there's a design flaw, neither one of you are going to succeed. So this has to be driven from the top down. Is there anything that I missed or anything that you'd like to add to that, Dave?
Nope, I would just reiterate, keep it simple. Start with a baseline and then improve and expand over time. A lot of times I think people make it way too complicated. And as you said, just start with 2 or 3 metrics in each area. Track those really well. Provide broad visibility in the organization, and then collaborate together to improve those.
That's great. Thank you both. Now, for the first question that we're going to answer here, one of our attendees asked about defining active users versus simply users. And I think this was asked during the product breadth discussion, but one of you take a stab at defining active users versus simply users?
Yeah, I'll take a stab, and Dan, if you have anything to add. The way that we look at it is that we track the number of monthly, weekly, and daily users, and active users to us are those that are actively engaged in all those 3 levels, from a breadth, from a depth, and from a frequency. And so those are a couple different, using some ratios, daily active to monthly active, weekly active to monthly active. Those help us understand, but it's basically somebody who's logging in at a certain frequency that makes sense for your business versus those that have a license but aren't actively using it. They rarely, if ever, log in or aren't logging in at all.
Sure, and I think there's been a couple caveats on the user discussion throughout our conversation today. And I think one of the first ones that you mentioned there is understand what's appropriate for your business. So if logging in once every 3 months actually is appropriate, then that's a good measure for you. For us, we look at monthly active user when we look at whether or not we have an active customer. We don't have a charge per seat, so we don't have necessarily a capacity that we're looking at. We're just looking to grow that number as quickly and as high as we can. So we're looking at, in the last 30 days, how many people have we logged in or have been logged in, and we stopped there just at the login. We utilize frequency as the measure of how frequently they're coming in, and also time on site in order to supplement that metric. So we separate them out. We don't use the frequency in conjunction with the monthly active user count. So Brent, do we have more questions?
We do, yes. In fact, along those same lines, would you consider someone who is sent reports or data from your product an active user?
Oh, I don't have that yet. So Dave, that's probably a great one for you to field.
Yeah, I do. It's a type of active user, and the question is can you identify those that are not reading the emails and that's just going into a trash bin, your email trash, or whether they're actually consuming the data? Because there's a lot of executives. I know an executive that I used to work with, a well-known SaaS CEO, loved to have everything in his email and on his mobile. That was the way he consumed all of his reports, and he spent a ton of time on there. And so in that case, I would consider that person as an active user because they may not be logging into our product, but they're leveraging the value prop of our product and getting tremendous value out of that. Sometimes hard to measure, but I think if you can uncover it and you connect the dots, you can identify somebody who's just looking at reports, emailed reports, and consider them an active user.
Great. Now jumping to the MTS conversation, great question here about what is the most effective method of direct customer success intervention for an NPS detractor?
Dave, do you want to start there? And I'll follow up.
Yeah, Brent, it was the best intervention from a customer success side for MPS detractors.
Yep. What, if anything, could a CSM do when they receive that notification that they have an NPS detractor?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, regardless of whether it's a detractor or a promoter or anybody, is that just to have somebody from the company acknowledge the feedback and be authentically grateful for it. Even just detractors, I think the important thing is to have a very authentic and genuine email that goes from the CSM or somebody else that says, hey, we acknowledges the score that the detractor gave and ask for additional feedback and insights and understanding with the desire to learn and improve. And I think by doing that in a very genuine and authentic way actually builds more credibility and turns what may be kind of negative feedback into a very positive situation.
And I think from my standpoint, how we use it here also, I think, kind of dictates our approach to resolving this. Is anytime we get an NPS submission from a customer, it goes into a public Slack channel that everybody in the company has access to. So once that comes in, the CSM on that account has the ability at that point to pull in essentially anybody in the company they need to resolve that issue or talk to that customer. So depending on whether or not they give us any type of written feedback, like I'm struggling in this area of the application, or I don't understand this, it might be appropriate for a CSM to reach out and actually do some additional training, repair the relationship, or I'd say probably about 50% of the time we have that CSM coordinate with one of our product managers, and the product manager ends up being the one that talks to the customer like, hey, look, I'm sorry you're struggling in this area of the app, even though you've had training. Can I watch you use it? Can I see what you're doing? Can I explain to you why we did it and understand maybe we're just a misalignment of goals? But I think this again comes down to Dave's statement of get in touch with that individual, get the right resource involved, and oftentimes just hearing them out and getting that feedback, you're on the road to improvement. But NPS, Dave, like you mentioned before, has a really long tail. You're not going to increase your NPS score 10 or 15 points over a month by doing this. This is a long-term, sustained effort that oftentimes is a culmination of multiple different touch points or experiences, and that takes a long time to repair or to fix.
Great, thank you. Now, the final question here is regarding time to value. And do either of you have a specific example of either the way you or someone else is measuring time to value?
I can address that one. I mean, I've used different software platforms in the past to do this. So I think there are a number of different technologies out there to accomplish it. But the ultimate end goal is to set up generally like a feature or an event So let's just say, for instance, maybe it's clicking a save button or deploy or send, and you're looking to see, okay, at what time does that occur? And then the key component here is that you need to tie it back to a particular date or a time. So you need to be able to take those two components, link them together, and measure the time between. Now, this can be done in minutes. So oftentimes, maybe in B2C apps, you're going to see minutes or seconds even. Like, Twitter is probably looking for you to fill out a profile, then do a post, probably in 5 minutes, maybe less. Where from a B2B perspective, you might be looking at a measurement of days, right? But again, that's going to be dependent on the dates and the access that you have to data. So if you're looking at contract signing, in the B2B world to a particular event, setting a measurement in minutes probably isn't going to be a successful endeavor for you. But if you're looking at from first login for the user to a particular event, again, you might be looking at 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or even days. Dave, how about you guys? Do you have anything in particular that you can highlight?
No, I think you nailed it. The only thing that I would say is that to continue to reevaluate it and optimize over time. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes the time to value, sometimes your product can deliver faster time to value than are delivering now. And from both a product and a process perspective, just to find that sweet spot and then continuing to optimize over time. Don't optimize it once and then think that it's done. Continue to optimize your strategy for helping your customers achieve time to value. The last thing that I would say is it's important also to connect the dots back with the customer, because sometimes the customers are looking for a time to value, but they may not recognize it or be too busy to recognize it in the moment. So sometimes it's really nice to kind of go back and reinforce and kind of and make sure that the customer understands that you've hit one of those value indicators and congratulate them and celebrate that. Big or small.
I think that's a great point. I've noticed very successful campaigns often come, hey, I saw you did X. Here's some things you might think about doing next, and lead them on to that next value driver. But that's a great point.
Yep. That's great.
Well, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Dan. As I mentioned previously, a recorded version of this webinar will be made available, and we'll get that to you shortly. ClientSuccess and Pendo are here to help. We are incredibly passionate about helping you deliver value for customers, and because of our passion, we've built industry-leading technologies to help you. I'd highly recommend visiting the ClientSuccess and Pendo blogs for more information. Dan and Dave, thanks again to all of our attendees. Thank you for